All right, so I'm gonna talk today a little bit about the Rust project and give an introduction to what it is, a few parts of how it runs, and then at the end I'll talk a little bit about contributing and sort of a couple tips for that. I will admit that I gave a very similar talk just last month in RustConf along with James Munns. So this is adapted from that. So if and when those slides come up, feel free to check out that one and see how they compare. So starting with sort of who am I? So I've been a part of the Rust project since 2019. I currently co-lead the types team. I'm a compiler team member. I'm a Lang team advisor, and then I have been a Lang team council rep for the last year and just switched out from that. I contract with FutureWay to do Rust work, but my sort of primary job is actually as a graduate student where I study mouse stylus development. So let's start with the question of who is responsible for Rust. And if you think about this question, there's a lot to it. You can ask, well, the language Rust, the Rust compiler, the standard library, the tooling, maybe just promoting adoption for Rust. And if you think a lot about this, there's a lot of answers that you could say. And really, there's two organizations that we can think about when we think about who is responsible for the Rust. So the first is the Rust project, and then the second is the Rust Foundation. And starting with the Rust Foundation, which was formed in 2021, we can really think about the foundation as a non-stock, not-for-profit membership corporation. And this is a bunch of technical jargon, but if you think about how the foundation is laid out, you can really think of three parts. First is the staff, which oversees the everyday operations. You have the board of directors that in some ways works to look at how the foundation works. And then you have a set of member companies that have representation within the foundation. And the primary purpose of the foundation is to support and promote the Rust project, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And the Rust project is the principal developer of the Rust programming language, not the foundation. But when we say support, what kind of support do we mean? Well, the first type of support that the project or the foundation does is advocates for Rust in different consortiums, such as the Open Infrastructure Foundation, the Safety Critical Rust Consortium, writing proposals for governments, essentially advocating for Rust at a sort of industry scale. The second thing the foundation does is provide financial support for the infrastructure that the Rust project relies on, such as CI to do testing of every single build on every single target that we support, or providing the servers to run crates.io and the resources needed for that. The foundation hires a number of engineers to do support work and some development. So they have a couple of infrastructure engineers, security engineers, crates.io. And they provide grants for both the project and the community. And this helps to funnel money from companies back into the project. And there are other things the foundation does, but I figured this is good enough of a start. And let's switch to talking about the Rust project. So unlike the foundation, the Rust project is largely a volunteer organization, and the project is responsible for developing Rust. And the project is, you can think of as three parts, but not really. First is the Leadership Council, which is the governance structure, and I'll talk about in a second. Then you have the project teams, which are the decision-making bodies, and then working groups, which are a number of people that do various types of work. And really, though, the project is made up of teams. And teams are responsible for the aspects of what we think of as Rust. There are 7 teams that we call top-level teams. And if you look at these, each team selects a leadership council member. So there are 7 teams and 7 members. And the leadership council replaced the core team, which you may have heard of in 2022, sort of. And I won't get into the details of this, but there was an interim period between the core team and the leadership council. But the leadership council confers authority, or is given authority to ensure the successful operation of the project. And each team is responsible for a different part of Rust. So the language team is responsible for the syntax, semantics, or the specification of the language. The compiler is responsible for the implementation. The library team is responsible for both the standard library as well as official crates. The DevTools team covers many of the development tools. The infrastructure team is responsible for CI, bots, and releases. Moderation for upholding the code of conduct. And then Launching Pad is a special one, but it's currently used as a place where groups without a home live. But if you think about it, there are a lot more than just these 7 teams, because teams can have sub-teams and working groups and project groups and all the different ways that we organize the work we do. So for example, the Lang team has 6 sub-teams. So there's the advisors, the GOSIM team, the Lang docs team, the spec team, the ops team, and the style team. And there's one more here that's a little special, which is the types team, but it's not included here. But in total, across all 7 teams and the sub-teams, we have hundreds of people that make up the Rust project. But that's a lot, and you might ask, well, how do these groups actually decide what Rust is and what Rust should be? And to answer these questions, I want to divide this into really 3 parts. So first is where do we go to make decisions and to have discussions? Second is, how do we actually make these decisions and what are the processes for that? And then finally, just for fun, what are the bots that we use to help us? And you'll see why this is important in a little bit. So starting with the discussion forums where we talk. There were a few that I mentioned, or that I put up there, and I'll talk about them in a second. But the fundamental question of all of these is, how do we talk to each other and keep track of it all and make it accessible to the project and the community? The first place that we have discussions is on Zulip, and this is where most everyday discussions happen. And if you were to open up Zulip, you can see that on the left, you have a number of channels that are a team or a group or a project. And then within a channel, you can have multiple topics that separate different conversations. And then within a conversation, you can see all the messages together across different time. And what's nice about Zulip is you can see all of this without logging in. It's open to the public. But of course, if you do log in, you can participate in the conversations and share your own voice. On the other hand, technical development and record keeping typically happens on GitHub. And so the Rust project has a GitHub organization that you might know of. And of course, the compiler and standard library are on GitHub. And so are RFCs, which I'll talk about in a bit, which outline the major decisions of the language. But you might not know that even teams and projects may have repos on GitHub that can track things like minutes from meetings and technical design documents. And there are others, right? So I talked about Zulip and GitHub, but there's things like the official Discord, which used to be used a lot more, and a couple teams still do use. There's the internals discourse, which is used for some technical discussion. Teams, when they have meetings, will oftentimes have video meetings, and Jitsi is often used. And then some working groups use Matrix, which is just another chat application. The second thing I'll talk about is some of the decision-making processes that we use. And we'll start with the RFC, right? So the RFC process is intended to provide a consistent and controlled path for changes to Rust so that all stakeholders can be confident about the direction of the project. And this is important because it's not just Rust project members that need to be informed and understand what decisions are happening, but the community and the people that use Rust too. Most RFCs are technical, so things like async await, where clauses, even things like create.io features or releases, these are all RFCs. But some RFCs are used to shape the way the project runs. So adding new teams, establishing the leadership council, changing the way we think about Rust, either through releases or the specification, or even making new additions. These are all RFCs. In general, though, RFCs are used for big or impactful changes. But each team has specific processes for smaller changes. And these go by different names for different teams. You may have heard MCPs, ACPs, or experimental feature gates. So MCPs are a lightweight form of RFC that the compiler team and types team use for architectural changes that are not end-user facing, with some exceptions. ACPs, or API change proposals, are a lightweight first step to getting new APIs added to the standard library. And experimental feature gates are used by the Lang team to allow experienced Rust contributors to start implementing features without having a full RFC. But across RFCs or these smaller processes, how do we know when something should be accepted, either for an experiment or to be stabilized? And this is where final comment periods, or FCPs, are used. And these are used to obtain consensus about a decision. And you may ask, why consensus? And the short answer is the majority vote is not always best. We may want to hear the minority input. And we define consensus in the project typically as no objections and then at most 2 missing yes votes. And this ensures that we know that at least enough people have heard it and don't think there's a problem with the decision that we can move forward. And then after a consensus is reached, there's a 10-day final comment period where anybody can give feedback about that decision. And 10 days is nice because it means that if you're off a week, you can come back the next week and see. But it also gives plenty of time for anyone to see and give feedback. And you might be asking, that's a lot to keep track of, and you're right. And this brings me to the last point, which is the bots and how we use them to help the project run. And at the end of the day, bots are our clerks. They help us do things that is too tedious for us. And let's start with Bors, which is the backbone for the Rust CI. And BORS runs every time a change is made. And so it's not all that surprising that BORS is the #1 contributor of all time. Crater is a tool that we use to run experiments across the Rust ecosystem. So every time that we have a release, we check that the release doesn't break any crates that we know of. So a typical Crater report might look like this, where you can see that in this case, we had 3 root regressed crates with about 100 crates total. And so we can go back and look to see, why did this break? Can we fix it? Is this change actually useful, or do we need to revert? TriageBot does a lot of things. So on GitHub, when a PR is made for a change, it automatically assigns a reviewer to make sure that somebody looks at it. Whenever certain changes are made that people say, I want to know about changes to this part of the compiler standard library, it'll ping that group. In meetings on Zulip, TriageBot is used to help run the meeting, either through making sure that everybody is good to go before moving on, or whenever we have something to read to make sure everybody's read. But overall, bots are pretty cool. And like I said, I went through 3 parts, and there's a lot more, but hopefully this gives you at least some idea of sort of how the project runs. But you might be looking at all this and think, oh, well, how can I get involved? And there's a couple ways. The first thing you can do is the easiest, and that's just to use and test the library, the language, the compiler. So use nightly in beta. Tell us if something breaks. File bugs, whether this be something that breaks, an error message that really is just terrible. Maybe you have some feature that doesn't work quite how you want it to. Write blog posts. Tell us about your experience. We love to see them. The second thing, after you've used and tested the language and library, join the discussions. Talk to us on Zulip. If you have an idea for a language feature you want to talk about and discuss, come talk to us. On GitHub, if you see an issue and I see this too, or you see a PR that's gonna add a feature that you really like, but you think maybe could be changed, talk about it. Go tell your friends on social media. Say, I'm at GOSIM and there's this really awesome talk. Tell people. And then finally, you can contribute directly. And you might be asking, wait, but how? And I could make a whole talk out of this. In fact, I did last year. But there are a few talks this year that go over this in different manners. So a few people yesterday, and then Santiago and I are giving a workshop later today. But I wanted to share at least a couple tips for success, at least from me. And these are my thoughts. Others will have different opinions. The first is come with a purpose. Have some idea of what you want to work on. Whether that's a feature, a tool, maybe you want to help performance in some way. Have some idea of what you want to do. Be proactive. If there is a feature that you want to work on, and it's been sitting without work, without being stabilized for years, find out why. Go search the issue thread. Figure out what the status of things are. The project members are happy to help, but we're not the books. Go read the books, find what's happening, and we'll help you navigate them. Be patient and persistent. So like I said, project members are happy to help, but we, like anyone, get busy. If you're waiting to hear back from us for some reason, maybe you wrote a PR and you're waiting for a review, maybe you asked a question about a specific feature, and what's the status of it? Don't expect to hear back from us immediately, but if it's been 3 weeks and you haven't heard anything, just say hi. Ask, is there anything you can do? We're happy to help. Just give us a minute and sometimes a poke. But at the end of the day, don't be afraid to start small. My first contribution to Rust was adding a test. It was already fixed. I didn't have to do anything but add a test. It's okay to start small. And there are a lot of really small things that can be done that are really useful, but oftentimes get missed for the bigger things. And these are not always writing code. Sometimes it's as simple as going to an issue that got added and saying, oh, this regressed and this at this release. Or somebody posts an issue with a big code base and we want just a small snippet that we can add to the test suite. Just doing that is really valuable. And really, these types of tasks can be really useful to learning how the project works, how the contribution process happens. And then find your niche, right? So it's not always going to be the compiler or the standard library. Maybe it's an official crate that we manage, right? Finding something that has many, many open issues that nobody touches. Maybe it's something like cargo that a lot of people use and certainly has things to be worked on. Many of our bots have a lot of features that people want. Your niche is not necessarily always going to be the compiler or the standard library. Find something. And then finally, have fun and participate. It's not just about the technical. It's not just about on GitHub. Come join us in Zulip. Talk about things. Enjoy. Have fun. A lot of people in the project I've talked to came with the intention to help out and stayed because they really enjoy the community. They come to conferences and get to chat with people about a language that they really find exciting. Enjoy contributing. So those are my tips. But I wanted to sort of end on one final point, which is what else are we doing to help things be easier, to help people contribute? The first thing that I want to shout out is the project goals that we just started the second half of this year. And really, I want to thank Nico, who's really spearheaded this work. And these project goals are currently a set of 26 different goals that people and teams across the project have said, I think this is important, and I'm willing to put my time into this in some form, whether that's reviewing something and hearing a design and giving feedback in different ways. And of these 26 project goals, there are 3 that we've identified as flagship goals. So the first is preparing the Rust 2024 edition. The second is working on the async experience and bringing that to parity with the sync experience. And then finally, which Gary talked about, is building the Rust for Linux project on stable Rust. The next thing that we've done recently, which I think is really exciting, is really opening up contributions to young open source contributors. So this is through Google Summer of Code 2024 and also OSPP. And so for example, in Google Summer of Code, we had 9 projects of different open source mentees, and these have gone really well. And for OSPP, we've had a couple too. But overall, there is plenty to do. If you want to get involved, don't worry. There will be something. And overall, the Rust project is complex. I think you can see there's a lot going on, a lot of different teams, a lot of different structures. But it's also exciting, and it's really awesome. And so with this, I want to say thanks. I am more than happy to take questions. If you ever have anything, feel free to reach out to me on GitHub or Zulip. I'm more than happy to talk in here.
Okay, thank you, Jay.